Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party, the podcast whose weekend was spoiled by a giant baby from the US. But enough about watching Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. I'm your host Dallas King, and joining me to virtually walk and talk our favourite political movies, Aaron Sorkin style, is the Jamie angriest man in Scotland to my Malcolm Tucker. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. It's always good to be part of the Caledonian Mafia.
Absolutely. So if people haven't already guessed from the introduction, we're here to talk about our all-time top 5 political movies. So basically it's any film that has a political slant, and I'm thinking that can be used quite tenuously from time to time. It may be that way in some of my picks anyway. So shall we just kick in and straight away with number 5? What is your number 5?
Yeah, my number 5 is so obviously usually with these lists, and I've done it many a time over many episodes, I was like, well, they're in no particular order, but I feel that after all these many times that we've podcasted, it's like, well, here's just a random list. I've tried to go with a top 5, but I'm sure it could change day to day. But my number 5 is a movie which starts with a number, 13 Days. I don't know if you're too familiar with this one.
I have seen this one, yes. Yeah.
So for people that aren't too kind of familiar with the movie, it's based in 1864 in October 1962, and U-2 surveillance photos reveal that the Soviet Union is in the process of placing nuclear weapons in Cuba, and these weapons have the capability of wiping out most of the eastern and southern United States in minutes if they become operational. And President John F. Kennedy and his advisors must come up with a plan of action against the Soviets, and Kennedy is determined to show that he is strong enough to stand up to the threat, and the Pentagon advises US military strikes against Cuba, which could lead the way to another US invasion of the island. However, Kennedy is reluctant to follow through because a US invasion could cause the Soviets to retaliate in Europe, and a nuclear showdown appears almost inevitable. This is kind of maybe a bit of a trend that with my types of movies, that I'm a huge political buff. I love most of the books I read are non-fiction, and they're mostly based around sort of American history and American politics, and I love sort of the procedural side of these sorts of things, like what's it like to be in these rooms, not so much like the grand events of history, but what's it like being in that room, having the decisions, and what are people's defined roles, and how does that all work within that type of system. And I think 13 Days really capture that so well, that it is very much a walking and talking movie. People are, the fate of the world is essentially hanging on by a thread, really, as Russia is ramping up, delivering nuclear weapons to Cuba, and the Americans could be striking back, and the whole world could be plunged into nuclear war. And I think it's something that we people of the 80s and 90s and so on, that when we were born, don't appreciate what the Cold War was like at that height, and the fear people genuinely had. And I think this movie captures that as the world did look like it was going to be on teetering on nuclear of war. And I think it's with Kennedy, so many kind of movies we've seen recently, perhaps in the 90s, something like JFK, which focused on the conspiracy theories after his death, and recently Jackie, which again shows the consequences of his death over the course of a week with his wife. I think a movie like this shows why John F. Kennedy was such a beloved politician, and why he inspired generations of people, that we look at perhaps the leaders that we have these days, and they seem cocksure, eager to rush in where angels fear to tread, whereas John F. Kennedy was a thoughtful guy, and he made decisions that could have plunged the world into nuclear war, but his steadfast resolve, the people he had around him, people like Bobby Kennedy, helped steer the world through into a peaceful solution to something like this, when the latter for most of that 13 days looked most likely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a story. I mean, I study school, which is how any sort of film or documentary about this particular sort of period in history has always sort of fascinated me. What did you think of Bruce Greenwood's portrayal as John F. Kennedy? Because I'm just going through his IMDb list here, and he starred in a lot of political films. He's
Yes.
been in lots of things. What was it? Some of them he had. He was in Mark Felt, The Man Who Brought Down the White House. He was in The Post. This was again this year. I'm sure at some point he's played Bobby Kennedy as well, but I can't remember what film it was.
He has, yeah.
Yeah, do you know which
I
film?
can't remember the movie off the. I can't remember. I can't remember the movie off the top of my head that he played Bobby Kennedy in, but yeah, he definitely did, and he's just one of these actors I think is criminally underrated in terms of his movies and what he does. He brings so much and gravitas to kind of each role, and I think I'm a huge fan of his. And whenever his name is added to a cast, I always think, oh, that's always a sign of good casting. He's even things like The Post as McNamara. This is pretty much taking sort of place not long really after kind of the 13 days sort of in the grand scheme of American politics when Nixon comes along. He always just stands out, and I think he's an actor that I just don't think gets enough credit for the roles, perhaps as he's mostly always the the side character, the person there. And even here, yeah, he is John F. Kennedy, but he doesn't perhaps have the kind of main role in this movie. That kind of more falls to Kevin Costner in this. And I think with him as Kenny O'Donnell, he is that kind of person where he's the everyman American perhaps that John F. Kennedy isn't, and we can sort of follow Kenny O'Donnell through this sort of experience. And yeah, I think he was fantastic in this role, Bruce Greenwood, and I think the whole cast is it's such a pitch perfect historical reenactment.
Absolutely. So was at any point were you tempted to go with X-Men First Class instead, or
Yeah, that would have been quite an interesting one, and I think that could make an interesting double bill one day, something like 13 Days and this at the same time. And yeah, I like that about that kind of X-Men movie, and I think the other two, perhaps for better or worse, didn't really kind of take that much further, where the Cuban Missile Crisis and something like X-Men First Class is so well defined and is part of the story, and it really puts these X-Men in like the time period they're in, whereas the other ones just sort of like, oh, Return of the Jedi was out at this time, or here's a wink and a nod to some of the antics that were going on at the time, whereas this I feel like was such a nice blend, and it's a shame the others didn't do that. It'll be interesting to see what they do with the fourth one in this sort of prequel series.
Absolutely. So I guess it's time for my number 5, and potentially a controversial choice, but I'm going with the Purge election year.
Interesting and topical as well.
Indeed, yeah. I was originally going to have the Purge just like as a franchise overall, because I think what it's doing right now is very interesting. But election year is probably the one that sort of really sort of turned the screw and decided to almost hold a mirror up to what is going on currently in politically. But The Purge essentially is, when it came out in 2013, was a movie which was deemed under IMDb as a horror/science fiction, where for one night of every year, all crime, including murder, is legal, and people could take out their frustrations and anger out in one night. And this was basically brought in by an alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans as a way of saving America, and it focused on one sort of affluent suburban white family at the time. But as it's gone on, it's sort of widened out the scope. The Purge, the first Purge this year, sort of looked at a sort of a fairly black community on Staten Island under the very first version of this experiment. But the Purge election year was released in July of 2016, just before the big election. And the plot of this particular one is that a woman is campaigning to be president. To basically, her sole campaign is to basically cancel the Purge, and so a group of hoity-toity men decide that they will use this year's Purge to take her out and kill her, to eliminate her competition. And it's just so on the nose of how people were feeling at the time that I think that what they're doing is they're popcorn movies, but the sort of the way they're becoming they've got a lot more to say than people actually think. And for me, I think it's become one of the most terrifyingly socially relevant franchises of the past sort of 5 years, I think.
Yeah, like I haven't. I've seen the first Purge, but I've never seen any other ones. And I did sort of fancy catching this one because I did find the trailer somewhat interesting, and the idea that I could probably get into this one without having seen I think there's another 2 before this, or three in total. So it's maybe on my list to maybe try and catch next week if I get the chance. My girlfriend goes away on holiday, so it gives me some time to go camp out in the cinema for a little while. So I definitely will definitely put that high on my list if it's made it into your list.
No, I think they are definitely worth a watch if you can, and you can watch each one individually without having seen the others because it kind of goes through the setup at the beginning of every sort of time. But I think it's just sort of the fact that in some of them they basically talk about how the government used the purge as an opportunity to sort of wipe out some of the sort of lower class, low paid families to take. Essentially to get rid of certain minorities and certain sort of to basically wean down the population size and stuff like that is really quite sort of terrifying. And, you look at the way certain things are going and you think, it's not really that far off of science fiction at the moment because you could see it happening potentially, which is why I've got that at my number 5.
Interesting.
So we move up to number 4 on your list, and what do you have for us?
This movie's 20 years old this year, and it feels probably as topical as ever, really. It's Bulworth, directed by Warren Beatty and starring Warren Beatty. And Warren Beatty plays the title character, Bulworth, and he's a Democratic senator running for re-election in California in 1996 in the height of the Bill Clinton era. And he's depressed by the cashing in on the right-wing trend in politics at the expense of his beliefs. He's an out-and-out liberal, and he decides to order a hit on himself after having taken out a huge life insurance policy. But his imminent death allows him to speak out in a brutally honest manner that is true to his old liberal and even socialist beliefs. And the interesting way that he does it isn't in the form of tweets or anything like that, but he does it in the form of hip-hop music, which is quite bizarre considering Warren Beatty is this elderly white man. And he kind of falls into sort of the black neighborhoods of California, and he falls in love with Nina, played by Halle Berry in central Los Angeles. So yeah, it's a really interesting movie, and I can't remember how I ended up seeing it for the first time. I remember buying the DVD, and I think it was from like when Aberdeen had a FOP, and you could kind of go in and you would pick up some cheap DVDs at the time. And it was a movie that, like, the poster was this like stretched face, and it was illustrated, and it just sounded interesting, and it kind of fitted in with sort of, I think I saw it like early 2000s, and I was kind of in a bit of a West Wing vibe at the time, so something like Bulworth seemed a good fit. And it just such a great movie because you watched it at the time and you thought, this is hysterical, this guy has got no care in the world for norms, and his verbal diarrhea, to an extent, his honesty or how brazen he is quite amusing to watch. And it's amusing in that respect because you think at the time, wow, imagine being a politician, being able to come away with these things and to run a re-election campaign on something like that. And then fast forward 20 years in the world we're living in just now, and you'll have to look at kind of what's been going on in the UK and Europe just alone the past few days with someone like Donald Trump. So kind of Bulworth was a movie ahead of its time, and I definitely think it's one of Warren Beatty's finest hours, really. I can't praise it highly enough. It seems to be a kind of cult movie, and I'm surprised it's never perhaps exploded to something bigger.
No, I think it's definitely a sort of one of those sort of cult ones. I think I actually remember it more for the song Ghetto Superstar.
Yes, that's right.
That came out of that one. That was my lasting sort of memory of that one, because that song was huge everywhere, and almost sort of dwarfed the movie, certainly probably over in the UK rather than the US. But yeah, Bulworth came out around about the same sort of time as other ones, sort of, wasn't it? Sort of like Wag the Dog and Primary Colours, which was taking a sort of rather sort of satirical look at politics at the time. But yeah, no, it's one that I probably really should put on a rewatch list at some point, because it's probably gained a lot in the last sort of 20 years in is probably even funnier now looking back on it as to where we are in politics at the moment. So.
Yeah, I think I hope people kind of put it perhaps up higher on the list, but I can somewhat imagine that it might be a bit more difficult with all the news coverage that certain politicians get, where it just feels like so draining. The idea of watching something like this might think, do I really need to watch another thing about a politician just sort of speaking, so brazenly? But I think people will be richly rewarded by this and reminded of what a great actor someone like Halle Berry even was. It's been a long time since she's been in anything particular of note or interest, and this showed what potential she had in the late 90s, and it's a shame to see her career hasn't gone the way it kind of promised to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going on to my number 4, and it's probably one that many people have probably got at the very top of their list, but for me, I've got it at number 4, and that's All the President's Men.
Interesting and good choice. Another topical movie as well.
Indeed. For me, I mean, this was, I think I probably saw it was probably around the time when I sort of started university. It was like one of those ones on the list of that people should watch at the time. And for me, what I love about it is it was just like the whole sort of procedural aspect of it. If you got to see the importance of journalism, and I think it's a film which is incredibly important for people to watch nowadays. Just the sort of the whole work ethic, and the fact that these people, their careers could potentially be ruined forever, but they still go along pursuing the story and publicizing it because they know that it's the right thing to do. I mean, Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford are brilliant. Jason Robards is the editor of the Washington Post as well, but I mean, it's just a fantastic film and still holds up today. I mean, there's some fantastic shots in there. That one in the sort of the library where it sort of pans out and then sort of zooms up over all the sort of books and then all the floors of the library and stuff is just stunning. And I mean, I remember when I'm watching The Post earlier this year, where it went through that and then had almost like a post-credit sting of the people sort of breaking into those Watergate offices, and I could almost imagine that the Post was basically setting up this extended cinematic universe of political films where it basically would go straight into All the President's Men. So for me, I mean, it's just one of the all-time greats, and I think it's a film that anyone who's got any sort of interest in politics or journalism or the free press or whatever needs to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remembered sitting there watching The Post as well, thinking, God, it'd be so funny if they did like a post-credit scene where they do the break-in, and it was just when it happened, I felt like going, no way! It was just, I thought it was so good, and yeah, I'm the same, and it could almost be a episode we could discuss one day, where like I'm a huge fan of movies about journalists, and it's almost the same perhaps as sort of the politics one, sort of a procedural one, where something like All the President's Men, where it's literally just a movie about two people getting on with their job, and this huge situation is unfolding around them, and they're just sort of going around their job in a methodical way, professional way, and that's just incredible to witness something like that. And I think it's great to see this movie seems to continues to pull in people year after year, and especially in the current climate with the attacks on journalism and how much the press all around the world are kind of diving into all this kind of corruption and Russian hacking, etc. It's definitely a movie that still, as again we've said with a few of these, just seems as topical as ever.
No, absolutely. And yeah, no, I mean, it's like it shows journalism for what many people imagine it would be, or what it would have been for when they were wanting to, become a journalist, not having to create clickbait articles and ironically sort of doing just top 10 lists and top 5 lists, which is what we're doing, but that's, modern sort of film criticism and journalism nowadays. But it was a different era back then, and it's one that I'm sure a lot of people would like to return to as well. So
yeah, definitely. And I think one of these, you see it with like the cuts in newspapers, the editorials and such like. And I think one thing that's definitely been a positive in particular really America, and for sort of things like the Washington Post, New York Times, which we see touched on in these movies like The Post and All the President's Men, is like the amount of investment that has sort of gone back into journalism to hold truth to power And I think that's been a positive as well. I think that if Trump hadn't have got in, perhaps those newspapers would have continued to sort of cut back, and their readership would have declined. And I think that's been a benefit of the Trump era, has been the revigoration again of the investment in the press, and for all the people that are critical of things like the failing New York Times and the Washington Post lobby, what a newspaper, whatever, that people are equally as well investing in them and championing them and using their websites and using them as ways to access information, which is going on in a world that is truly crazy.
Absolutely. And I mean, with the Post, I know all the president's been as well. There was a thrill. I remember when seeing the Post, there was a thrill of people watching the scene where they actually put together the sort of printing press for the paper and stuff like that. People were just like, oh wow, look at that. They just couldn't comprehend, just how much work went into actually printing a paper. And I guess a lot of that is lost because you've got computers and stuff these days. But I mean, it was just a different time. But as we say, it's a film which becomes increasingly more relevant as time, as history repeats itself almost. So yeah,
absolutely.
So we're heading into the top 3, and what is your number 3 pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go with this movie, which was I think it was in my top 3 of 2016 films, and it's Wiener, which ended up becoming a bit of a more notorious film than it originally was going to be. I don't know if you're familiar with this one.
I did. I saw it up here at the Belmont, and it was, I think, probably the best documentary I saw that year. And yeah, just one of those stories which is just too unbelievable to be true, but then just gets even worse as it goes along, and you're just like going, what are you doing? Stop. But yeah, I'll let you explain it. Take it away.
Yeah, if people aren't too familiar with Anthony Weiner, we mentioned his name a few times, but if one man played such a key role in getting Donald Trump elected, it ended up being inadvertently and sort of somewhat unsurprisingly Anthony Weiner. To give you a bit of an in-depth insight into Weiner in the film, he was a serving 7 consecutive terms member of Congress, and Anthony Weiner was good friends and political allies to people like the Clintons, and he was once a highly respected member of Congress from New York City, and he was seen as a man kind of sticking up for the everyday person. He would be there on the Congress floor, championing the working guy. He was passionate, he was full of beans. But all that changed in June 2011 when he was forced to resign in disgrace after admitting that he did in fact tweet a photo of his crotch, which he claimed was hacked and wasn't him. In reality, as it always is with people, it was himself. So at the time, his wife Huma Abedin herself was a key aide to kind of Hillary Clinton, was pregnant with her first child, but she decided to stick with her man. 2 years after that, Huma Abedin continued to stay with Anthony Weiner. Their relationship still strained and going through issues, and Weiner decides to resurrect his political career in a run for New York City mayor. And he realised that he's an uphill battle, not only because of the known previous tweeted photos. Whenever he goes to press conferences or events, people bring it up, they question his ability to, as a father, as a trusted member, but there are also other lewd photos that haven't come to light yet, and naturally with these things they come out, and his personal life begins to suffer as he continues to campaign for mayor, and the onslaught of the media going after him, exposing these lewd photos, affairs and relationships, and sexcapades over the internet, and his relationship continues to fall apart, and his mayoral ambitions continue to fall apart in front of us. And we have a completely car crash insight into his campaign, his relationship, as this all continues to fall apart. And the movie ends, obviously, with his failed mayoral bid, but his relationship somewhat still intact, and perhaps the worst damage that he has done has been to his family and his reputation. But if anyone remembers the famous James Comey letter, Anthony Weiner, in the run-up to the 2016 election, was found to have been at it again with someone over the internet, and it was a young 16-year-old girl. And while the FBI was looking at his computer, they found some of Hillary Clinton's emails, which reopened an investigation into her emails, which were a letter was produced to the Congress saying it was open again, and Hillary Clinton to this day argues that was the moment that lost her the campaign, and that's what brought Donald Trump to life. So Anthony Weiner is a person that will go down in history for many, many reasons, and this film gives us an interesting insight into it, and it's hard not to watch and feel like it's Jaws, that even as the movie ends, that there's still a sting in the tail of Anthony Weiner's career.
Yeah, no, it's one of those sort of documentaries which is just too unbelievable. You think it could be like a parody, but it's all true, and yeah, it's like he comes across, at times as sort of like a nice guy and he's a bull, but it's like rule 101: if your name is Wiener, the one thing you should never do is basically sex text photos of your own wiener to someone. It's like, it's 101 in politics, surely. But it's a fantastic documentary, and definitely one worth checking out. I believe it is on Netflix at the moment, actually, if you want to check that out. So
yeah, it's one of those ones you will be watching behind your hands. It's a fascinating insight into a mayoral campaign, and a political machine, and yeah, it's just crazy to believe what this man has done to the world, and in terms of not being able to keep it in his pants. So yeah, highly recommend Wiener. If you're still hurting that Donald Trump is president, perhaps maybe not watch this one, because you might have to take a shoe out of your TV and buy a brand new one.
Yeah, but her emails.
Exactly, yeah, and it's, oh dear, it's I'm cringing just thinking about this movie. Okay.
Yeah. Well, my number 3 is yet again a film which has become perhaps more relevant as time's gone on, and it's V for Vendetta.
Excellent choice.
Yeah, a fantastic film based on the graphic novel by Alan Moore. One that received a bit of a mixed reception on its release. Fans of the graphic novel weren't too keen on the adaptation, but I hadn't read it at that point, and I just thought the film was fantastic. It's got one of Natalie Portman's all-time best performances in it for me. Hugo Weaving as the mysterious V, a terrorist who, I suppose, what the government would consider a terrorist. One man's terrorist and another man's freedom fighter, is a man who is rising up against an oppressive British government, who is taking basically full control over the state. And basically one day he meets Evie, played by Natalie Portman, and slowly she becomes involved in his cause as basically a new sort of Guy Fawkes figure to take down this new regime. It's a film which, if you haven't seen, even if you haven't seen V for Vendetta, you will be aware of it because of the mask. The sort of now iconic mask, which has become the face of many sort of different campaigns and resistance movements around the world as well. But it's a film, sort of watching stuff like The Handmaid's Tale these days, it feels very much like that, in that it's just different enough to be fictional, but you could see it happening. And yeah, for me, it's sort of watching it a couple of years ago. It's getting to that point where you're thinking, this isn't that far off, I think. And again, it's a film which could become even more relevant as the years go on. But for me, it's one of the best graphic novel comic book adaptations of all time. And yeah, it's for me, it's what wins over is the performances of Hugo Weaving, who's behind the mask the entire time, but his vocal performance is superb, and Natalie Portman is just fantastic in it.
Yeah, I think with like this, it's. I remember seeing it at the cinema at the time when it came out, and I've been really impressed with it. And what's blown me away is that when we think of like some of the big movies of the past, 10, 15 years, like the iconography of this movie has exploded in a way that I don't think anyone could have imagined possible, and it's probably almost become one of the most influential movies on our society, and how people present themselves in that period of time, that you think of those masks and they're everywhere now, that probably some Chinese factory somewhere has made an absolute killing off this movie. And I think it's just absolutely impressive how that movie has become part of the zeitgeist of the place, that, as you say, even if you've not seen the film, you've seen that mask, and that's something that's so hard to do. And it's definitely, once again we say it, it's just as relevant as ever.
Yeah, no, I think out of my list, it's probably one of the film which has probably had more sort of influence on sort of politics, certainly within young people than any of the others. I mean, All the President's Men is hugely influential, but certainly V for Vendetta had a huge sort of impact on sort of younger people, and sort of, I guess, giving them sort of a way to, and a sort of style of how to conduct themselves in sort of dealing with politics, and realizing that there is a need to speak out and stuff like that, because it deals with issues about how certain minorities, whether it be sort of race or sexuality, whatever, are victimized and basically sort of almost sort of cast out and killed off, and it's basically sort of learning to rise up and make sure that your voice has been heard. So
absolutely.
Okay, cool. Amazingly, we actually haven't had any crossover yet.
I think that's coming, though.
I think there is coming. I think there's. I basically sort of, as soon as I sort of suggested this last week, I knew there'd be one film which would probably be pretty much at the top of both of our lists. But I'll leave it up to you to introduce your number 2 political film of all time.
Yeah, my number 2 is Election, the Alexander Payne movie from the late 90s.
Excellent choice, which means I think I can tell what your number 1 is, but it's good to see a political film which is not about government politics, but about a different type of politics. So for people who haven't seen Election, do you want to give us a brief rundown of what it's about?
Yeah, you're 100% missing out on a great original comedy. Jim McAllister, played by Matthew Broderick, is a social studies teacher at Carver High, and a student of his, Tracy Flick, played by Reese Witherspoon, tends to rub him up in the wrong way. Flick is a loner but ambitious girl and decides to run for class president, and McAllister convinces football player Paul to run against her. And then his lesbian sister Tammy joins the election after her girlfriend starts going out with Paul. And during the campaign, Tracy plays dirty, plying students with muffins and gum, and Tammy adopts an anarchist attitude that the student body responds to. But Paul has a few skills to offer for the position himself. This is one of my all-time favourite movies, and I never tire of it. I remembered when I first saw Sideways, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It was one of those movies I was like, this is brilliant, who's this director, and wanting to seek out the rest of his films, and then I kind of stumbled upon Election, and it's not my favourite Paul Thomas, it's not my favourite Alexander Payne movie, but it is definitely up there with Sideways for sure. And it's great to see Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon in slightly different movies that we're so used to. Matthew Broderick as sort of the comedy guy, the wacky guy. In this, he plays a very downbeaten, downtrodden teacher that, he's having an affair, that's going terribly. And we all know someone kind of like a Tracy Flick, that person that will do anything and walk over anyone and do it with a smile. And Reese Witherspoon is perfect in this. People often associate her with her roles in something like Legally Blonde, but for me, she will always be Pick Flick, Tracy Flick herself. It's just such a great movie, such a great comedy. And even though it isn't about government, it is about a race for the president of the high school. Like, it's impossible not to draw the parallels between certain things in the 90s. Tracy Flick has her own parallels with someone like Hillary Clinton and such like, and the reasons that someone like Jim McAllister finds Tracy Flick so abhorrent are many of the things that people said about Hillary Clinton as she ran for president. She's too ambitious, she needs to be put in her place. Right, we're going to get the jock to run against her instead, and watch what happens. And then we've got an anarchist running against her. And once again, it becomes all too familiar and a bit of a timeless comedy classic in this one.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic film, and one of the sort of first films I'd seen that I realised that Reese Witherspoon was actually much more than just sort of like the pretty face that was in like Cruel Intentions and things like that. She was the real deal, and when it comes to political movies, it can be any sort of politics. I mean, I was looking at the dictionary definition again to see what sort of leeway I had in some of my choices, and this was considered at several points, but just didn't make it into my top 5. But I'm glad it's made it into yours, and it's just one of those ones which is everyone knows all the different archetypes from their own time at school and stuff like that. So it's one that resonates well with everyone, I think.
Absolutely, and I wish more people knew of this film, and I find it frustrating sometimes to go, "Oh, tell me you've seen Election, tell me you've seen Election." It's like, no, I've not seen it. It's criminally underrated, I think.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, if this podcast does anything, but it helps some people find some films and give them a go that they maybe haven't seen before, then that's our job done, and that's a win. So, I guess it's time for my number 2, and it's gonna, I think, tie in nicely with your number 1, I think. And my number 2 political film of all time is In the Loop.
Yep, that's my number one. It was always going to happen. It was just a case of where it all tied in.
Absolutely. So, In the Loop is partly inspired by a television show in the UK by Armando Iannucci called In the Thick of It. I say partly inspired by in the fact that they're both about politics, but there is one sort of character who appears in both of them, and that is Peter Capaldi and Armando Iannucci's finest creation, Malcolm Tucker, the spin doctor with the who's basically turns the art of swearing, pretty much into an art form, into a new type of language. The withering put downs and the abuse that he gives certain people is just utterly astounding. That it's absolutely hilarious, and he's I wouldn't even say he's not even a villain. He's the guy who tells it like it is, I think. But In the Loop is sort of centered around a sort of there's a young sort of up and coming politician in the UK who ends up saying that war is unforeseeable, and then this sort of kicks off this whole situation where the US get involved, and he ends up going over and having to be taking part in committee meetings and stuff like this, and it just sort of all escalates into this crazy thing that you think, this can't be true, this can't be how politics is, but from basically what everyone said, it totally is. And it's the politician is played by Tom Hollander, who essentially is playing the sort of straight man of the story, and he's just utterly fantastic. And at the same time as going across to the US and being excited about getting, diplomatic visas and getting to go through different lines at the airport, still has to come back to do his sort of constituency meetings with this whole situation about a wall that's falling down and stuff like this, and just the whole sort of balance of it just works perfectly. And I mean, it for me, it was, I think, the comedy of the year that year. I think it was about 2009, and it's just one of the funniest films, and so many quotable lines from it. And also, In the Thick of It came back for another series later on, but it's Armando Iannucci's pretty much admitted that he can't do another series of it, sadly, because politics, certainly in the UK and probably in the US as well, has become so beyond parody that it wouldn't be worth it. I think people laugh too much at normal politics that anything that they did would no longer be seen as unbelievable. It would be seen as fact. So yeah. So why do you have it as your number 1 film of all time?
I think it's just such a wonderful takedown of not just sort of British politics, but the American one as well. And it's like, as you say, he still has to, like, in amongst this push towards war, that he's still got to contend with this constituent and a wall that's falling apart. And I think this kind of sums up sometimes that sort of the American view of UK politics is that it's quite parochial and quite small and stuff in terms of how they react. It's very traditional, whereas the American politics is so big and bombastic, and you couldn't imagine the Paul Ryans of the world, all these different senators, your Chuck Schumers, whatever, having an issue or a debate about a wall with someone. And I just think the performances in this are just pitch perfect, and as you say, like, there's only Malcolm Tucker and Jamie are the only characters that retain their original roles really from the TV series. And I just think it's one of these movies that I remember watching it with a crowd and just being in absolute hysterics, and the whole audience was just resonating with it as well. And like that is the most that you can ask from a comedy, is for an entire audience to just click with it. And I love it. I just genuinely think it's just incredible. And Malcolm Tucker is one of the greatest original characters of all time. And Peter Capaldi will he's Doctor Who to most people, but for me he will always be Malcolm Tucker. That guy is just an icon.
Absolutely. I remember when he first got announced for the role of Doctor Who, and someone sort of made a mashup trailer of Doctor Who and sort of some of his best lines from In the Thick of It and In the Loop, and it was just one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It was just brilliant. But yeah, I mean, the lines are just so incredibly funny, but they're all just so incredibly obscene that we probably couldn't really say them on here. Talk of popping a John TV bonnet on your purview and ramming it up somewhere, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, like you say, it's a lot of the same cast from The Thick of It, but they're all playing sort of different people. But yeah, you don't mess with a winning formula, which is Armando Iannucci and Malcolm Tucker in dialogue like that. It's just superb. And it's got a great cameo as well from Steve Coogan. Is the guy who's the way the ball is coming into his mum's back garden. And it's just like, hello. Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I mean, it's one which a lot of people in the UK have known, but I don't know how big it was over in America, but it's certainly worth checking out, because yeah, it will give you an accurate view of how politics is currently going in the UK, if you want to know. So yeah.
I think the one thing that's quite odd about this as well is that obviously Veep came sort of after this movie, and it does feature quite a few of the same American actors. They sort of transitioned over to that, and again in sort of different roles. And it's amazing when I've gone to like Americans, like, oh, have you obviously you like Veep and watch Veep. Have you watched like pretty much the original version of this, The Thick of It, In the Loop movie? It was nominated for a freaking original screenplay Oscar, or adapted one, and they were like, people were like, no, I've never heard of it. And I always think it must be so exciting to be a fan of Veep, thinking, oh my god, this show is brilliant, and then realizing it's got a UK cousin, and it's like another 25 odd episodes and a feature-length Oscar-nominated movie that they can watch as a companion piece to this fantastic American show too. Yeah, no, I mean, it's something which is just, for me, it's the best political film to come out of the UK ever, and I don't think anything will ever beat it, certainly not anything like The Darkest Hour, The Dullest Hour, more like. I thought it was absolutely terrible. But yeah, so I guess that just leaves one final film to discuss, and I was going back and forth on this for a while. In the Loop was at the top, but I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to go back to one of my favorite sort of films in the mid 90s. For me, it's one of, actually no, I'd say it's the greatest on-screen president in the history of movies, and for me, it is Air Force One. Fantastic choice. I would never have in a million years thought of that. That is such a good pool. Well, it was like, for a while I was thinking politics, and then it was like, a lot of them are about presidential campaigns and stuff. Could I get away with any film that features a president? And for a while I was thinking, could you get away with Independence Day? And then I thought, well, Bill Pullman is good, and he has got one of the most iconic moments in cinema history, certainly from the 90s onwards, with his, this is our Independence Day speech. But for me, besides Jed Bartlett in The West Wing, certainly the best TV president we've ever had. For me, it's got to be Harrison Ford in Air Force One. I just think, it's Die Hard on a plane. Let's face it, it is. They're on a plane, terrorists take over. The president has to take them out because, of course, as it's written into the script, he used to be, a former, air pilot and soldier and stuff like that. So he's got the skills to take them on. Similar, you have to write this sort of stuff in Independence Day. It's the same. A lot of the Rock's movies recently, I've realised, Skyscraper, he was a former FBI agent who becomes a security consultant. In Rampage, he was former Special Forces, but then decided to change careers to learn about apes, but you just need that one line of dialogue to
basically say why he's so huge and can carry a gun and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, Air Force One, it's Die Hard on a Plane, but it's done really well. It's got Gary Oldman hamming it up. You've got a British guy with a European accent, done, tick. It's got a great sort of a supporting cast. You've got sort of William H. Macy. You've got sort of Xander Berkeley, Dean Stockwell, stuff like this. But for me, a lot of it came down to I was certainly not aware of this sort of thing, but I did learn about politics at the same time as watching Air Force One. You think, but how could you? But the whole sort of 25th Amendment thing about how, the president is incapacitated or unable to perform his presidential duties, therefore the presidency would pass to the vice president and stuff like that. I learned that from Air Force One.
Subsequently used about 6,000 times a season in 24.
Absolutely, yes. Anytime they've got to go under general anaesthetic or whatever, you've got this. But and I know that basically as soon as Trump was elected, people were talking about how would we be able to invoke the 25th Amendment and stuff like this. But for me, it's just purely just a great action film, and Harrison Ford makes for just, for me, the best on-screen fictional president. I probably should say fictional president of all time for me.
I think, like, when I think of this movie, I think of, like, I think I was maybe like 10 at the time, and I could start to maybe have a bit more sway over the movies we were renting from Blockbuster. And I picked out Air Force One, and watching that movie as like a 10-year-old boy, and it's just got like everything you could kind of want. This action movie, like Harrison Ford is this, larger than life president. It's got all the great action lines, get off my plane, and yeah, it's so cool. And I can picture that Air Force One big bulky VHS rental box just perfectly.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those films which is slightly ridiculous, but you don't care. I mean, it came out around about the sort of same time as Con Air and stuff like this. So there was that great sort of the sort of 96 to 98 was a sort of a great time for sort of like that old school Hollywood action film. You had like Face Off and stuff coming out around about that time, but it was just a great film. And I mean, it still was enjoyable over here, but I can imagine that it played like gangbusters in the US. Like that moment when they all get on the, spoiler by the way, but they get on the sort of the small sort of helicarrier plane at the end, and the guy goes, just updating our call sign, we are now Air Force One. And it's got that thing of, it's like one of those things which I don't know if it happens in real life, but it's always in like stuff like Apollo 13, Air Force One, and whatever. It's where, all the action is taking place on a plane or a spaceship. These guys are doing a lot of hard work to sort these situations out. But as soon as like the plane lands safely or something, everyone in those rooms starts cheering and hugging like they're the one responsible, even though they've not really had too much to do, but they take it as a personal victory. Like, yes! They start throwing papers up in the air. Everyone's just like, I can't believe it, yeah! And yeah, it's just the sort of epitome of like a truly great sort of summer blockbuster. And for me, the finest, my personal favourite political film of all time.
It's an excellent choice, Yeah, I think like we've got a pretty diverse list of movies here, from documentaries to action movies to everything in between.
And only one crossover, which was very surprising. I thought there would have been a couple that we might have picked both on, but yeah, no, it's a great list. So out of that, yeah, there's basically 9 films for people to go and check out if they haven't already. But I'm sure the likes of Air Force One, most people have probably seen, but there's definitely a few hidden gems in there to check out as well.
Absolutely. Exactly, you never need an excuse to watch Air Force One. I mean, before we wrap up, I have a question to ask you as well. I watched a movie this week, and I know that you've seen it at the Edinburgh Film Festival, and it was in your top list. And I seeked out this week, and I would just love to know, before we get to that, what movies have you watched this week, Dallas, and what would you have seen and recommend?
I think actually the only film that I've actually seen this week is Skyscraper, which is Die Hard
Oh,
in the
I've yet to
Towering
see that, but
Inferno.
I'm going to go see it Sunday.
Yeah, no, it's the only one I've seen, and it's, perfectly enjoyable sort of Friday night popcorn movie. It does exactly what it says on the tin. The Rock is dependable as always. It's got some great sequences. The whole sort of jumping off the crane into the building, which plays a lot better in the film than it does on that poster, where someone basically worked out that given his sort of the image of him and where he was on the poster, the sort of different trajectories of where he would land, i.e. he wouldn't make it into the building, but it works a lot better in the film. I mean, unfortunately, the villains are nowhere near sort of Hans Gruber level, but I mean, it's perfectly, it's what The Rock does, it's what he delivers, and yeah, no, it's a great film, and it's not a great film. It's a good film. It's a good, solid film. I was planning to watch the 60th anniversary re-release of Vertigo, but I have to wait a couple more days to catch that one. So, what about yourself? I know there was a big one which you managed to catch a preview of, which I think we're going to save for a later date.
Yeah.
But what else have you got?
Oh, yes. I won't say much apart from... Yeah, so obviously I did see Mission Impossible Fallout this week, and I took someone along that had never ever seen a Mission Impossible movie, and she loved it, so that's always an encouraging sign. And I will say very little until the Joe public can go along and see it as well. And I saw First Reformed as well, which is incredible, and I just think that's a movie that people need to go along and see, and I have a feeling it's going to be gone from the cinemas very, very quickly. It's already showing in the infamous Screen 13 here in Edinburgh, so that's always a sign a movie is only sticking around for a week. And it's really worth seeing. Ethan Hawke's performance is fantastic, and it's a movie that will linger in people's minds after. But
I do want to see that one. It's not showing in Aberdeen until the 24th of August, sadly. That's the earliest it's going to come to our local independent cinema up here, so I've heard a lot of good things, so hopefully it'll be worth the wait.
I watched First Reformed and then went to see Incredibles 2 afterwards, a movie that I think everyone saw at the Edinburgh Film Festival or saw during unlimited previews on sort of the same period of time, and I felt like the last person in the world to go see this movie, and I think you had it in your top 5 movies of the festival as well, did you?
I did, yeah. For me, it was worth the 14-year wait, and yeah, I just thought it was certainly one of the best films I've seen this year so far. It's not perhaps Avengers Infinity War level, but in terms of Pixar sequels, it's certainly one of the best they've done. What did you think?
Yeah, well, I think I'm in the minority for this one. Like, everyone seemed to be coming out of this saying it's brilliant, it's great, worth the wait, everything like that, and I'd been a bit lukewarm on the trailers, and all the response I've had since seeing this movie has been how wrong I am. I've got no soul. But I genuinely didn't enjoy the movie, much at all. And there's aspects I liked about it, but I thought it was a huge, huge disappointment. And it was just completely unremarkable. It was unincredible.
Whoa. Well, I mean, maybe I was just really, maybe I'd need to watch it a second time to really sort of distill what I thought. But for me, I thought what really impressed me was just the look of the film. I thought it sort of took sort of the animation up a notch, and it looked incredibly cinematic. I mean, the sequence where Elastigirl is on the motorbike chasing through the city trying to stop the runaway train was up there, for me with stuff like Spider-Man 2 and sort of Batman Begins and things like that. It was incredibly polished and incredibly well done. And yeah, no, I just really sort of liked it, and liked the interplay between the family and stuff like that. And I mean, yeah, maybe the villain is maybe not as strong. It's probably certainly not as strong as Syndrome was in the first one, but I like the sort of scheme and stuff like that. And I think there's definitely a lot more places that this particular Pixar franchise could go. So.
Yeah, it's just it's one of these movies. I think, I just feel maybe it was coming out of a movie like First Reformed, where it's tackling so many huge issues and thoughts, and it's a kind of cinematic masterpiece in a way. It made for an odd double bill, and I think it was the fact that I was perhaps underneath a cold fan as well that made it a somewhat difficult movie to sit through. But yeah, it just wasn't a movie that sort of stuck with me, sadly.
Well, people, say, "Oh, I wasn't in the right mood," but that is true. Sometimes, what things that you take into the screen, whether you've had a bad day at work or something like that, or if you've watched like a double bill and it's two very polar opposite films and whatever, this stuff can sometimes affect what you think. And I was maybe on a festival high at that point. Maybe if I watch it again, I might not be as sort of 5-star sort of as I was at that time, but I guess we'll see. But yeah, for me at the time, I loved it and I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was one of the best sort of Pixar films and one of the best sequels for a comic book movie. Well, not actually a comic book movie, sorry, superhero movie is probably the technical term because it's not based on a comic. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I liked how I never noticed it until I listened to another podcast, the Little White Lies one, where it's like the first one is The Incredibles, and this is like Terminator, where it's like it's just Incredibles 2, it's not The Incredibles 2, and I find that to be a nice geeky touch.
Yeah, no, it's full of like a lot of nice touches. I mean, I thought there was sort of, you could see influences from different things. Because, I mean, when you think about it, The Incredibles came out before Batman Begins and before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, the Dark Knight trilogy and the MCU have become the sort of defining sort of comic book sort of franchises in that time. So, but the fact that it's basically picks up where it left off, and I mean, there's definitely influences. I mean, I could see a lot of sort of Batman Arkham Asylum, Arkham City sort of video game sort of stuff in there and things like that. And yeah, I still think it was incredible. So yeah,
maybe
that's my opinion. So
there we go. Maybe we've ended up doing something we inadvertently did last week, where we ended up picking this topic because of a small conversation we had at the end. And this week, the 21st of July for the UK, certainly anyway, is going to be the 10th anniversary of the Dark Knight. Perhaps we could maybe look at that, and maybe that's next week's one where you could look back at the anniversary of that.
Wait, you want to do a Nolan trilogy? Or yeah, we could do that. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do something along those lines. So there's our stinger for the week.
Too early for our Mission Impossible one, so we'll need something to fill the void. So yeah, we might as well.
We're sorted. There we go. Well, that was easy done.
And I'm sure you'll be able to regale us with tales of your trip to Chicago. I'm sure you'll be able to squeeze that
Mike
in
Schindler
somewhere.
and his very self and stuff like that. So yeah, that could be. There we go. We're sorted for next week. That's something to kill the time until Mission Impossible.
Absolutely. Although I do plan to try and watch the whole sort of franchise again if I can before I go and see it, because just thinking about it, it's one of those franchises, one of the few franchises I think that apart from number 2, but from 3 onwards, the films get better as you go along.
Well, I need to rewatch them as well now, because I obviously have seen this one, but I only found out with like 2 days notice that I was actually going to go see the film, and it wasn't actually official really till the day of, so I never had a chance to rewatch them all. So I now plan to rewatch them all before subsequently going back to the cinema in a few weeks' time to see the new Mission Impossible movie. But yeah, I think it's a movie that will definitely pay off quite a lot of little moments and beats from previous movies as well, so your rewatch will stand you in good stead.
Excellent. Well, I've heard them comparing it to like Mad Max Fury Road and stuff, but I did look back and I had a tweet in early May saying that I think that Mission Impossible Fallout will be the best film of the summer. So the reviews seem to be backing me up. Will I agree? I guess we'll find out in 2 weeks' time.
There we go. We'll tune in then.
Excellent. So I guess that leaves us off to sign off. But I guess your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to join us next week. We'll be talking about The Dark Knight and the Nolan legacy on the DC universe. So until that time, see you next time.
There we go. I'll get that off.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.